Hi, I'm Sarah. At 11:23 p.m. on a Wednesday night, I received the kind of phone call that doesn't just interrupt your sleep. It shatters your entire understanding of the people you thought you knew. My mother, Elena, had been found unconscious in a parking lot behind a 24-hour diner, wearing nothing but a thin nightgown in freezing rain. The people who had left her there? My older brother Marcus and his wife Jessica. But that wasn't even the part that broke me. What destroyed me was realizing this wasn't their first act of cruelty. It was just the first time she couldn't cover for them anymore. Before I dive deeper into this story that changed my life forever, I'd love to know, where are you experiencing this tale from? Are you listening during your morning commute, taking a break from work, or settling in for the evening? And if stories of resilience, family secrets, and finding strength in the darkest moments resonate with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for powerful true stories shared every day. Your support means everything to creators like me who believe these stories need to be told. Now let me take you back to that Wednesday night, the moment everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled like old paper in the rain. The storm had been building all evening in Portland, Oregon. Rain drummed against my apartment windows with the kind of intensity that made you grateful to be inside. I had been curled up on my sectional sofa, laptop balanced on my knees, working on a client proposal for my consulting firm. A cup of peppermint tea sat cooling on the coffee table next to me, and I had a documentary about ocean conservation playing softly in the background, my usual Wednesday night routine. I was deep in reviewing financial projections when my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from an unknown number with a 503 area code. Oregon, but not Portland. My first instinct was to ignore it. Probably a telemarketer or someone with the wrong number, but something about the persistence nagged at me. When the phone lit up a 4th time, I answered with reluctant curiosity. "Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was male, official, careful in the way that immediately signals bad news. "Yes, this is Detective Rodriguez with Hillsborough Police Department. Are you related to an Elena Chen, age 62? My breath caught. It wasn't just hearing my mother's name, it was the tone, measured and gentle, like he was handling something fragile that might shatter completely with one wrong word. "I'm her daughter," I managed to say, my voice smaller than I intended. "Ma'am, we have a woman matching her description who was found about 2 hours ago behind Murphy's Diner on Canyon Road. She was in a nightgown, no shoes, unconscious from exposure to the elements. She's stable now, but when she regained consciousness, she kept asking for someone named Sarah. Said you'd know what to do." The room tilted. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what I was hearing. Elena Chen, the woman who had once told me I was too emotional for my own good, the mother who hadn't spoken to me in over 4 years, was asking for me. "I'm about 40 minutes away," I heard myself say. "Tell her I'm coming." I had fled Hillsborough the day after college graduation, driven by years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. 4 years of silence stretched between us like a canyon I thought neither of us wanted to cross. Elena had always favored Marcus, excused his behavior, celebrated his achievements while treating mine like afterthoughts. When I landed my first consulting contract in the city, she didn't congratulate me. When I bought my apartment, she didn't ask to see photos. I had learned to stop expecting her calls, her interest, her love. But something about Detective Rodriguez's voice, the image of my mother alone and vulnerable in the rain, cracked through years of carefully built walls. I didn't pack an overnight bag. I didn't even change out of my yoga pants and oversized sweater. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and the emergency kit I kept under my kitchen sink, and I was out the door into the storm. The drive to Hillsborough felt eternal. Rain pelted my windshield faster than my wipers could clear it. Highway 26 was slick and treacherous, forcing me to grip the steering wheel with white knuckles and lean forward to see through the blur. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to process what was happening. The last conversation I'd had with Elena played on repeat in my mind. We were standing in her kitchen, the same one I'd grown up in, arguing about my decision to move to Portland. She accused me of abandoning the family, of thinking I was too good for Hillsborough. I told her I was tired of being invisible in my own home. She said if I left, I shouldn't expect her to chase after me. I didn't. For 4 years, I didn't. But tonight, her voice on that recording, scared, disoriented, calling my name, stripped away all the armor I'd built around my heart. I passed familiar landmarks through the rain, the shopping center where I had my first job, the park where I used to hide when home felt too suffocating, the exit sign for my old high school. Everything looked smaller through the storm, less significant than it had seemed when I was young and desperate to escape. Murphy's Diner sat at the edge of a strip mall, its neon sign flickering against the rain. I pulled into the parking lot and immediately spotted the police car, its red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the wet pavement. Behind the building, partially hidden by a large dumpster, I saw the ambulance, and then I saw her. Elena was sitting on a stretcher inside the open ambulance doors, wrapped in a thick gray blanket. Even from a distance, I could see how small she looked, how fragile. Her usually perfectly styled gray hair hung limp around her face, and her skin looked pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. A paramedic was checking her blood pressure, while she stared straight ahead with glassy, unfocused eyes. I parked hastily and ran through the rain. "Mom," I called out, a word I hadn't used in years. She turned toward my voice slowly, like she was moving through water. When our eyes met, recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like shame. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm fine. Just got confused, that's all." But she wasn't fine. Even in the dim light, I could see the bruise blooming along her left temple, dark purple against her pale skin. Her wrist was swollen, and she held it carefully against her body like it hurt to move. Detective Rodriguez approached us, his expression grim. "She wouldn't let us take her to the hospital initially," he said quietly. "Kept insisting someone had made a mistake, that she just fell. But the injuries..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're consistent with an altercation." I looked back at my mother, who was now staring at her hands. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked gently. She shook her head too quickly. "I slipped, that's all. Just clumsy." But her eyes told a different story. A story I was beginning to piece together, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to confront the painful truth about why I had really needed to leave home all those years ago. I convinced Elena to let me take her to the emergency room, though she protested every mile of the way. The Sacred Heart Medical Center was mostly empty at this hour. Just a few people in the waiting area, nursing late-night injuries and exhaustion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow that made Elena's bruises look even more pronounced. While she was being examined, I sat in the hallway outside the treatment room, my hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The detective had followed us to the hospital, and now he sat across from me, a small notebook balanced on his knee. "Your mother mentioned some family tension," he said carefully. "Said there was an argument earlier tonight about financial matters. Do you know anything about that?" I stared at the linoleum floor, its pattern of gray and white squares blurring together. "I haven't spoken to my family in 4 years," I admitted. "But financial matters? That doesn't sound like my mother. She was always very private about money." Detective Rodriguez nodded slowly. "She also mentioned feeling unsafe at home. Said she was staying with your brother and his wife temporarily while some repairs were being done to her house. Does that sound accurate?" Something cold settled in my stomach. Elena's house had been paid off for over a decade. She'd always been proud of that fact, mentioning it whenever anyone would listen. What repairs could possibly require her to move out completely? "Officer," I said, meeting his eyes, "my mother owns her home outright. She's lived there for 23 years. What kind of repairs would force her to leave?" He frowned, flipping back through his notes. She seemed confused about that when I asked. Kept saying she couldn't remember signing anything, but that your brother was, handling everything for her. The coffee cup cracked under my grip. Marcus had always been what our father called ambitious, but this sounded like something else entirely. Something that made my chest tight with a familiar dread I thought I'd left behind in Hillsborough. An hour later, Elena was released with her wrist in a soft cast and strict instructions to follow up with her primary care physician. She moved slowly, like every step hurt, and refused to make eye contact with either me or the doctor who'd treated her. I drove us to a small motel near the medical center, the kind of place where the carpet smelled like industrial cleaning solution and the heater rattled all night. Elena sat on the edge of one bed while I pulled the curtains closed and turned up the thermostat. "You can't stay here forever," she said quietly, staring at the ugly floral bedspread. "I'm not planning to," I replied. "But you can't go back there either. Not until we figure out what's really happening." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Nothing's happening. Marcus and Jessica have been nothing but kind to me. I'm just getting older. More forgetful. I probably imagined half of what I told that police officer." I sat down in the chair across from her, studying her face in the lamplight. The bruise on her temple was darker now, a deep purple that spoke of significant impact. "Mom, bruises don't come from imagination." "I fell," she said quickly. "I told you, I'm clumsy now." "You fell backwards into something that hit you with enough force to knock you unconscious?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her purse, a worn leather bag I remembered from my childhood, and pulled out her phone. It was an older model, the kind with physical buttons that she'd never wanted to upgrade. As she held it, I noticed her hands were shaking. "I should call Marcus," she murmured. "Let him know I'm okay. He'll be worried sick." Before she could dial, I gently took the phone from her hands. The screen showed 17 missed calls, all from the same number. I scrolled through the call log. Marcus had been trying to reach her since 9:47 p.m., less than an hour after Detective Rodriguez said she'd been found. "He's been calling," I said, showing her the screen. She nodded eagerly. "See? He's concerned about me. He's a good son." I stared at the timestamps, my mind working through the timeline. If Elena had been found around 9:30 p.m. and Marcus didn't start calling until 9:47, what had he been doing for those 17 minutes? If he truly didn't know where she was, wouldn't he have called immediately when he discovered her missing? "Elena," I said, using her first name deliberately, "what time did you leave Marcus's house tonight?" She looked confused. I don't remember exactly. We had dinner, and then I think I went outside for some fresh air. The next thing I knew, I was in that ambulance." "You went outside in a nightgown during a storm?" I guess I was more confused than I thought, but something in her voice didn't ring true. There was a rehearsed quality to her words, like she'd practiced this explanation. I'd heard that tone before, years ago, when she used to explain away Marcus's behavior to concerned teachers, neighbors, anyone who questioned why her golden boy seemed to have such a violent streak. I scrolled further back in her phone, looking for text messages. Most were from Marcus over the past few weeks. "Remember to take your medication. Don't answer the door unless you know who it is. I'll handle the bank stuff, don't worry about it." Each message felt more controlling than caring. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A text thread from 2 weeks ago. "Marcus, the lawyer needs you to sign the amended documents tomorrow. Elena, I don't understand what I'm signing. Marcus, just trust me. It's for your own protection. Elena, can we wait until Sarah can look at them? Marcus, Sarah doesn't care about this family anymore. You said so yourself." I looked up at Elena, who was now lying down with her eyes closed, though I could tell from her breathing that she wasn't asleep. "What documents did you sign 2 weeks ago?" I asked. Her eyes snapped open. "How do you know about that?" "Your text messages. Marcus had you sign something." "What was it?" She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved her injured wrist. "Just some paperwork. Something about making things easier if I get sicker. He said it was normal for people my age." "What kind of paperwork exactly?" "I don't remember all the legal terms. Power of attorney, maybe? Something about the house being in both our names now, in case something happens to me." My heart sank. "Elena, did you sign over ownership of your house?" "Not ownership," she said quickly. Just access. So he can help with maintenance and bills. I've been forgetting things lately, and he's been so patient with me. I stood up and began pacing the small motel room. This was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just been physically abusing our mother. He'd been systematically isolating her and taking control of her assets. The pattern was textbook elder abuse, the kind I'd read about in legal journals but never imagined happening in my own family. When did the forgetting start? I asked. Elena looked uncomfortable. A few months ago, maybe longer. Marcus says it's been going on for almost a year, but I don't remember it being that bad. And when did you move in with him and Jessica? About 6 weeks ago. There was a problem with the furnace, and Marcus said it would be cheaper to stay with them while it was being fixed than to pay for a hotel. I pulled out my laptop and did a quick search for furnace repair companies in Hillsborough. Then I called 3 of them, claiming I needed to check on a repair job for Elena Chen's address. None of them had any record of work being done at her house, recent or otherwise. "Mom," I said, closing the laptop, "there was no furnace repair." She stared at me, confusion clouding her features. But Marcus showed me the estimate. Said it would cost thousands. "When did you last see your house?" I'm not sure. Marcus handles all of that now. He says it's better if I don't worry about property maintenance. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made me physically sick. Marcus had isolated Elena from her home, convinced her she was experiencing memory problems, and manipulated her into signing away her financial independence. And when she'd finally started to question what was happening, based on that text exchange about wanting me to review the documents, he'd escalated to physical violence. I thought about the 17-minute gap between when Elena was found and when Marcus started calling her phone. Had he been cleaning up evidence, coaching Jessica on what to say? Or had he simply been waiting long enough for it to seem believable that he'd just discovered she was missing? Elena's phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Marcus. "Where are you? We're worried sick. Come home immediately." I showed her the message. "Do you want to go back there?" She read it twice, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Relief? Exhaustion? "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I want anymore." That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to help Elena recover from this incident. I was going to find out exactly what Marcus and Jessica had done to her. Document every lie, every manipulation, every moment of abuse. And then I was going to make sure they could never hurt her again. I turned off her phone and tucked it into my purse. "You don't have to decide tonight," I told her, "but you're not going anywhere until we figure out what's really been happening." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. But inside that small motel room, with my mother's broken trust and my own shattered illusions scattered around us like pieces of a puzzle, I knew the real storm was just beginning. The next morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the motel's thin curtains. Elena was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady, when I slipped out of the room with her house keys, the spare set she'd always kept in her purse, attached to a little ceramic owl keychain I'd made her in 3rd grade. She'd kept it all these years, even through our years of silence, and somehow that small detail gave me hope. I drove through Hillsborough's quiet residential streets, past the coffee shops and boutiques that had replaced the blue-collar businesses of my childhood. The town had gentrified in my absence, sprouting wine bars and yoga studios where auto repair shops and diners used to be. But Elena's neighborhood, my old neighborhood, remained largely unchanged. Her house sat on Maple Street, a modest 2-bedroom ranch with the pale yellow siding and red front door I remembered. The lawn was overgrown, newspapers lay scattered on the walkway, and the mailbox overflowed with what looked like weeks of accumulated mail. If Marcus was truly handling everything for Elena, he was doing a terrible job of maintaining appearances. I parked in the driveway and walked slowly toward the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't set foot in this house since the day I'd graduated college, the day Elena told me that if I was so eager to leave, I should stay gone. Now I was returning not as her daughter, but as her protector. The key turned easily in the lock. Inside, the house felt different, not just empty, but violated somehow. The familiar smell of Elena's lavender candles had been replaced by something chemical and sharp. The living room furniture was arranged differently, and several of Elena's personal items, photo frames, her collection of ceramic birds, the antique jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, were missing. I moved methodically through each room, taking photos with my phone, documenting what was there and what wasn't. In the master bedroom, Elena's dresser drawers hung open and empty. Her closet contained only a few old dresses and a winter coat. Everything else was gone. But it was the kitchen that told the real story. On the counter, I found a stack of documents that made my stomach lurch. Property deed transfer papers, signed and notarized. Power of attorney forms. And a letter from Elena's bank, dated 3 weeks ago, confirming the closure of her savings account and the transfer of all funds to a joint account, with Marcus Chen as the primary holder. I photographed every page, my hands shaking as I realized the scope of what they'd done. This wasn't just physical abuse. It was financial theft on a massive scale. Elena had owned this house outright, had nearly $200,000 in savings from my father's life insurance, and Marcus had systematically stripped her of everything. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging where you don't belong." I screenshot the message and kept searching. In Elena's bedroom, tucked behind a stack of old photo albums in her nightstand, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small digital recorder, the kind used for dictation. The last file was dated 2 days ago. I pressed play. Elena's voice came through clearly. "I don't understand why I can't see my bank statements, Marcus. I just want to know where my money is going." Marcus's voice, sharp and impatient. "We've been through this, Mom. You're not capable of managing these things anymore. That's why you signed the papers." "But I don't remember signing anything that gave you access to everything. Can we call Sarah? She understands legal documents." A long pause. Then Marcus, his voice dangerously quiet. "If you mention Sarah's name again, you'll regret it. She abandoned this family. She doesn't get a vote in how we take care of you. I just want to understand." The sound of something slamming, followed by Elena's sharp intake of breath, then silence. I played it 3 more times, my chest growing tighter with each repetition. Elena hadn't been confused or forgetful. She'd been asking the right questions, challenging their control, and they'd intimidated her into silence. The memory problems Marcus had described to neighbors and doctors weren't symptoms of aging. They were symptoms of psychological abuse. I was downloading the audio file to my phone when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the front window, I saw Marcus's black BMW in the driveway. He was walking toward the house with long, angry strides, his face set in the expression I remembered from childhood, the one that meant someone was about to get hurt. I slipped the recorder into my jacket pocket and moved to the living room, positioning myself between the front door and the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I wanted him to see me the moment he walked in. I wanted him to know that this time, I wasn't running. The door burst open without a knock. Marcus filled the doorway, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his usually perfect hair disheveled. Behind him, Jessica hovered like a nervous shadow, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus demanded, his voice echoing through the empty house. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied calmly. "This isn't your house. It's not yours either. You lost the right to be here when you decided our family wasn't good enough for you." "Actually," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket, "I'm here as Elena's medical advocate. Funny thing about that, I spent some time reviewing her financial records this morning." Jessica stepped forward, her face pale. "Those are private documents. You have no right." "I have every right when my mother is found beaten and unconscious in a parking lot," I interrupted, "especially when those documents show systematic financial abuse." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Financial abuse? I've been taking care of her when no one else would. Do you have any idea how much it costs to manage someone with dementia?" "Elena doesn't have dementia," I said firmly. "She has trauma. There's a difference." "You've been gone for 4 years," Jessica snapped. "You don't know what we've dealt with. The confusion, the paranoia, the accusations. She's been impossible." Impossible or inconvenient? I asked. Because there's a big difference between caring for someone and stealing from them. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. I didn't steal anything. She signed those papers willingly. After you convinced her she was losing her mind, after you isolated her from anyone who might question what you were doing. I pulled up the audio file on my phone. Want to hear her asking about her bank statements? Want to hear how you responded? The color drained from his face. You're recording us? No, but Elena was. Turns out she's not as confused as you wanted everyone to believe. Jessica grabbed Marcus's arm. We should go, she whispered urgently. But Marcus wasn't ready to retreat. He stepped closer to me, and for a moment, I was 8 years old again, cowering in our shared bathroom while he screamed at me for telling our parents he'd broken my favorite toy. But I wasn't 8 anymore. I was 31, I had a law degree, and I'd spent 4 years learning how to stand up for myself. You think you can waltz back into our lives and play hero? He snarled. You think anyone's going to believe you over us? We're the ones who stayed. We're the ones who took care of her when you couldn't be bothered. You're the ones who saw an opportunity and took it, I replied. But that ends now. I walked past him toward the front door, then turned back. I'm filing for emergency guardianship tomorrow morning. And I'm reporting the financial theft to Adult Protective Services. You have 24 hours to return every penny you've taken from her accounts. Marcus's face turned red. You can't prove anything. I held up my phone, where the audio file was still displayed. Want to bet? As I walked to my car, I could hear them arguing in the house behind me. Jessica's voice was high and panicked, while Marcus's responses grew louder and more aggressive. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the reality of what I'd just done sink in. I was about to go to war with my own family. But as I looked at Elena's house, her real home, the one they'd stolen from her, I knew I didn't have a choice. Some battles choose you. I drove back to the motel, my mind already working through the legal steps I needed to take. Adult Protective Services, guardianship petitions, financial fraud reports. I had the evidence, the documentation, and most importantly, I had Elena's recorded voice, asking the questions they didn't want her to ask. When I walked back into the motel room, Elena was awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee from the lobby machine. You went to the house, she said without turning around. Yes. Did you find what you were looking for? I sat down on the bed across from her. I found more than I was looking for. She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. Not confusion, not the glazed look of someone losing their memory, but sharp, painful awareness. They took everything, didn't they? She whispered. Yes, I said simply. But we're going to get it back. For the first time since I'd arrived in Hillsborough, Elena smiled. It was small and sad, but it was real. And it told me everything I needed to know about whether she was truly ready to fight for herself. The war for Elena's life and dignity was about to begin. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Thursday morning came gray and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seeps into your bones and stays there. I was up before dawn, laptop open on the small motel desk, coffee growing cold as I worked through legal documents and phone calls. Elena slept fitfully beside me, occasionally murmuring in her sleep. Fragments of conversations, apologies to people who weren't there. My first call was to Margaret Kim, a family law attorney I'd met at a professional conference 2 years ago. She specialized in elder abuse cases, and when I explained the situation, her voice turned grave. Sarah, what you're describing is textbook financial exploitation, she said. The isolation, the manufactured confusion, the property transfer. It's a common pattern. How quickly can you get me copies of those documents? I'm scanning them now, I replied, feeding papers through the ancient scanner at the motel's business center. But Margaret, there's something else. I found a recording device in her house, audio of them discussing how to handle her questions about money. A pause. That changes everything. With documented evidence of coercion, we can move fast. I'll file for emergency guardianship this afternoon. But Sarah, you need to be prepared. They're going to fight this hard. And they're going to make you the villain. She was right. By noon, My phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I finally answered one, a woman's voice, sweet as poisoned honey, introduced herself as a reporter from the local newspaper. "Ms. Chen, I'm calling about the family dispute involving your mother. I understand there are some serious allegations being made. Would you like to comment on your brother's claims that you're exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman for financial gain?" I hung up without responding, but the calls kept coming. Marcus was already working the narrative, painting himself as the devoted son, protecting his confused mother from a greedy, estranged daughter. It was brilliant, really. Use my 4-year absence against me. Make it look like I had swooped in to take advantage of Elena's supposed dementia. But I had something he didn't expect. Witnesses. Mrs. Patterson had lived next door to Elena for 15 years. I remembered her as a quiet woman who kept beautiful flower gardens and always waved when she saw me visiting during college breaks. Now standing on her front porch while Elena napped back at the motel, I hoped she'd remember me too. "Sarah?" she said when she opened the door, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "My goodness, you've grown up. I heard about your mother. How is she?" "That's actually why I'm here, Mrs. Patterson. I'm trying to understand what's been happening with her lately. Have you noticed anything unusual?" Her expression shifted, becoming guarded. "Well, I probably shouldn't say anything. Family business and all. Mrs. Patterson, my mother was found unconscious in a parking lot 2 nights ago. This isn't family business anymore. It's a police matter." She glanced around nervously, then stepped aside to let me in. Her living room was exactly as I remembered. Floral wallpaper, doilies on every surface, the smell of chamomile tea and old books. "I've been worried about Elena for months," she admitted once we were seated. "She used to come over for coffee every Tuesday morning. We'd sit in my kitchen and talk about our gardens, our books, the neighborhood gossip. But then Marcus moved her out, said she needed more supervision." "When did that start?" "Early September. He came by one afternoon with some story about her furnace breaking and her needing to stay with them temporarily. But Sarah, I never saw any repair trucks. No workers, no permits posted. Nothing." I leaned forward. "Did you see Elena much after she moved in with Marcus?" Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly. "That's what worried me most. She used to walk by every morning on her way to the pharmacy, always stopped to chat about my roses. But after she moved, I only saw her maybe 3 times. And when I did," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "She looked different. Thinner, nervous, like she was afraid to talk too long." "Did you ever hear arguments from their house?" "Oh, honey." Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's what I should have reported. Last week, I heard shouting coming from Marcus's place. Elena's voice, crying, begging someone to stop. Then Jessica yelling about being tired of the drama. I almost called the police. But, well, you know how it is. You don't want to interfere in family matters." I thought about Elena's bruises, her broken wrist, the fear in her eyes when she talked about going home. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to write down everything you just told me. Dates, times, what you heard. Will you do that?" She nodded firmly. "That poor woman. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. You're helping now." My next stop was Elena's bank. I'd found her account statements in Marcus's possession, but I needed to see the full transaction history. As her daughter, I didn't have automatic access, but Margaret had coached me on what to ask for. The bank manager, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, reviewed my emergency guardianship petition and Elena's medical records from the hospital visit. "I can provide general account information," she said carefully, "but what I can tell you is troubling. Your mother's savings account, which contained over $200,000 3 months ago, was completely emptied on October 15th. Large withdrawals, all authorized by the joint account holder." "Marcus," I said. "The transfers were made to multiple accounts, investment portfolios, a new checking account, even a substantial payment to a luxury car dealership." She paused, studying her computer screen. "Ms. Chen, In my 20 years of banking, I've never seen someone liquidate their entire life savings so quickly, unless they were facing a major emergency. What kind of emergency justifies buying a luxury car? Lisa's expression told me everything I needed to know. I was leaving the bank when my phone rang. Elena's voice was panicked. "Sarah, they're here. Marcus and Jessica are at the motel. They're saying I have to come home right now, that you're filling my head with lies. I don't know what to do." "Lock the door," I said, already running toward my car. "Don't let them in. I'm 5 minutes away." I broke every speed limit getting back to the motel. In the parking lot, I found Marcus's BMW parked sideways across 2 spaces, blocking other cars. They weren't planning to stay long. This was meant to be a quick extraction. I could hear voices through the door before I reached our room. Marcus was using his reasonable voice, the one he'd perfected for dealing with teachers and authority figures when we were kids. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly," he was saying. "Sarah's been gone for years. She doesn't understand your medical situation like we do. The doctor said you need consistent care." "What doctors?" Elena's voice was small but stubborn. I used my key card and stepped inside. Marcus and Jessica were standing near the window, effectively cornering Elena on the bed. She looked tiny against the headboard, clutching a pillow like a shield. "You need to leave," I said calmly. "Now." Marcus spun around, his face flushing red. "You poisoned her against us. She was fine until you showed up with your conspiracy theories." "She was fine?" I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. "You call this fine?" I showed him the picture of Elena's bruises from the hospital. "Or this?" The next photo showed her swollen wrist. "How about this?" The final image was her empty house. Drawers pulled open, belongings scattered. Jessica stepped forward, her voice shrill. "Those pictures prove nothing." Elena's been confused, packing things herself, forgetting where she put them. We've been trying to help her organize. By stealing her life savings? "We didn't steal anything," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We moved her money to safer investments. She asked us to." I played the audio recording. Elena's voice filled the small room, asking about her bank statements, questioning the papers she'd signed. Then Marcus's voice, cold and threatening. "If you mention Sarah's name again, you'll regret it." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena stared at the phone in my hand like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You recorded our conversations?" she whispered. "You recorded them," I said gently. "You hid a recorder in your nightstand. Some part of you knew you needed evidence." Marcus's composure finally shattered. "You manipulative little..." He started toward me, his hand raised. "Touch me and I call the police," I said, not moving an inch. "In fact, I think I'll call them anyway. Detective Rodriguez is very interested in hearing this recording." That stopped him cold. He stood there, fist clenched, breathing hard. For a moment, he looked exactly like our father had during his worst rages, the ones Elena used to pretend didn't happen. "This isn't over," he said finally. "You're right," I replied. "It's not. Because tomorrow I'm filing a formal complaint for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. And next week I'm requesting a full audit of every account you've touched." Jessica grabbed Marcus's arm. "We should go," she hissed. As they left, Marcus turned back one last time. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said. "I'm saving what's left of it." After they were gone, Elena and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I made that recording because I thought I was going crazy," she said quietly. "I kept forgetting conversations, losing track of papers I was sure I'd seen. But listening to it now, I wasn't forgetting. They were gaslighting me." "Yes," I said simply. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I thought about the timeline, the gradual isolation, the systematic destruction of her independence. Probably since Dad died 2 years ago, maybe longer. Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I protected him when we were children. When he hurt you, when he broke things, when he lied. I always made excuses. I thought if I loved him enough, he'd change." "Some people don't change," I said. They just get better at hiding who they really are. That night, as Elena slept and the rain tapped against the windows, I worked on my laptop, organizing evidence, preparing statements, building a case that would ensure Marcus and Jessica could never hurt her again. But more than that, I was building something else, a foundation for the family Elena and I could become. One built on truth instead of silence, protection instead of exploitation, and love that didn't require looking the other way. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I felt like we might actually win. The Washington County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment as I walked through its heavy glass doors Friday morning, Elena's arm linked through mine. She wore the navy blue dress I'd bought her the day before, something dignified but not expensive, something that said victim rather than gold digger. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone who had finally decided to stop running from the truth. Margaret Kim met us in the lobby, her briefcase organized and her expression confident. She'd reviewed all my evidence overnight and assured me we had a strong case, but courtrooms were unpredictable, especially when family money and reputations were at stake. "Remember," she whispered to Elena as we walked toward the hearing room, "answer only what they ask. Don't elaborate. Don't apologize. Just tell the truth." Elena nodded, though I could see her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in a room full of strangers who would judge her credibility, her memory, her worth. Marcus and Jessica were already seated at the defendant's table with their attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit who looked like she'd eaten nails for breakfast. Marcus looked polished and composed, playing the role of the concerned son perfectly. Jessica sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law overwhelmed by false accusations. The judge, Honorable Patricia Wells, called the hearing to order. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Margaret stood first, outlining our petition for emergency guardianship and presenting the evidence systematically. Bank records showing the suspicious transfers. Audio recordings of Marcus threatening Elena. Medical documentation of her injuries. Mrs. Patterson's witness statement about the arguments she'd overheard. "Your Honor," Margaret concluded, "this isn't a case of family disagreement or age-related confusion. This is a clear pattern of financial exploitation and physical abuse designed to isolate Mrs. Chen from her support systems and her own assets." Then it was their turn. Marcus and Jessica's attorney, who introduced herself as Victoria Sterling, stood with theatrical confidence. "Your Honor, my clients are heartbroken to be here today. For the past 6 months, they have provided round-the-clock care for Mrs. Chen as her cognitive abilities have declined. The petitioner, Ms. Sarah Chen, abandoned her family 4 years ago and has had no contact with her mother during this period of illness." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was seething. They were going to paint Elena's abuse as caregiving and my absence as abandonment. "The so-called evidence," Sterling continued, "consists of out-of-context recordings made without consent, manipulated financial records, and coached testimony from neighbors who have no medical training to assess Mrs. Chen's mental state." She painted a picture of Elena as a confused elderly woman whose paranoid delusions had been exploited by a resentful daughter seeking revenge. Marcus, in their version, was the long-suffering son who had sacrificed his own financial stability to care for a mother who no longer recognized reality. Then Judge Wells turned to Elena. "Mrs. Chen, I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me, in your own words, why you believe you need protection from your son?" Elena stood slowly, her voice barely audible at first. "Your Honor, I'm not good at speaking in public, but I know what happened to me." "Take your time," the judge said kindly. Elena's voice grew stronger. "For months, my son told me I was forgetting things, important things. He said I was signing papers and then forgetting I'd signed them. He said I was asking the same questions over and over. He made me feel like I was losing my mind." She paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time. "But I wasn't forgetting. I was asking questions because nothing made sense. Why couldn't I see my bank statements? Why did I have to ask permission to go to my own house?" Why was I suddenly too confused to manage money I'd been handling for 20 years? And when you asked these questions, Judge Wells prompted, how did your son respond? He got angry. He said I was being ungrateful, that I was making his life difficult. The night before I ended up at that diner, I told him I wanted my daughter to look at the papers he'd had me sign. I said I wanted Sarah to explain them to me because I didn't understand what I'd agreed to. Elena's voice broke slightly. That's when he hit me. He said if I contacted Sarah, if I told anyone about our private family business, he'd make sure I had nowhere to go. And then he and Jessica, they put me in the car and left me in that parking lot. Jessica said maybe a night in the cold would help me remember what real problems looked like. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Marcus's attorney looked shaken by the raw honesty in Elena's voice. Judge Wells made notes, her expression unreadable. Mr. Chen, would you like to respond to these allegations? Marcus stood, his composure perfect. Your Honor, my mother is clearly unwell. She's been having episodes like this for months. Paranoid fantasies about being mistreated, false memories of conversations that never happened. We've been trying to get her proper medical care, but she refuses to see specialists. Everything we've done has been to protect her from herself. And the financial transfers? Made at her request, to protect her assets from her own confusion. She was writing checks to scam callers, forgetting to pay bills, leaving cash lying around the house. We consolidated her accounts to prevent further financial losses. It was a masterful performance. If I didn't have the recordings, the documented evidence, the witness statements, it might have even been convincing. But then Judge Wells asked the question that changed everything. Mrs. Chen, do you remember making the recording that was submitted as evidence? Elena nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I hid a small recorder in my bedroom because I thought I was going crazy. I wanted to prove to myself that the conversations I remembered were real, not delusions like Marcus said they were. And why did you feel the need to prove that? Elena looked at me, then back at the judge. Because every time I questioned something, Marcus would tell me I was imagining it. He'd say I was having an episode, that I needed to trust him to handle everything. But I wasn't imagining it. I was asking reasonable questions about my own life, and they were punishing me for it. Judge Wells turned to Marcus. Mr. Chen, are you aware that recording conversations without consent is legal in Oregon when one party is protecting themselves from potential harm? Marcus's attorney whispered something urgent in his ear. His confident mask slipped for just a moment. Furthermore, the judge continued, the financial records show transfers totaling over $200,000 from Mrs. Chen's accounts to accounts controlled by you. Can you explain the necessity of removing your mother's entire life savings? It was temporary, Marcus said quickly. We were protecting her assets during her period of instability. By purchasing a $70,000 vehicle? The courtroom erupted in whispers. I saw Marcus's face flush red as he realized the judge had done her homework. Every transaction, every purchase, every lie was laid bare in the public record. Judge Wells called for order, then delivered her preliminary ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting temporary guardianship to Sarah Chen, effective immediately. Mr. Marcus Chen and Mrs. Jessica Chen are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Elena Chen, directly or indirectly. All financial accounts and property transfers are frozen, pending a full investigation. She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Chen, elder abuse is a serious crime in Oregon. I strongly suggest you retain criminal counsel. As we left the courthouse, reporters crowded around us, shouting questions about the case. I kept my arm around Elena, guiding her through the chaos toward my car. Behind us, I could hear Marcus arguing with his attorney, his voice rising above the crowd. This isn't over, he shouted after us. You think you can destroy everything I've built? I'll fight this. I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, he'd already destroyed everything himself. I was just cleaning up the wreckage. That afternoon, safe back at the motel, Elena sat quietly while I organized the legal paperwork we'd received. The temporary guardianship gave me authority to access her accounts, change locks on her house, and make medical decisions if needed. It was more power than I'd ever wanted over another person's life, but it was necessary to protect her. "Sarah," Elena said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I need to tell you something. About why you really left." I looked up from the papers. "Mom, we don't have to." "Yes, we do." Her voice was firm, more determined than I'd heard it since I'd arrived. "Marcus didn't just hurt me, he hurt you too, when you were growing up. And I let him. I made excuses. I told myself boys would be boys, that siblings fight, that you were too sensitive." The air in the room felt heavy. "I know. I chose him over you, again and again. When you left for college, I was angry, because I knew it meant facing the truth about what kind of son I'd raised, what kind of mother I'd been." I set down the papers and moved to sit beside her on the bed. "Elena, let me finish," she said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to become the mother and daughter we never were. But I need you to know that seeing you fight for me these past few days, it's shown me what real love looks like. Not the kind that makes excuses, but the kind that shows up when it matters." For the first time in 4 years, I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was steady. "We're going to get through this," I told her. "Together." Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak afternoon sunlight filtered through the clouds. It felt like the beginning of something new. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. And after years of living with lies, honesty felt revolutionary. The legal battle was far from over, but we'd won the first round. And for the first time since that phone call had shattered my quiet Wednesday night, I felt like we might actually have a chance at justice. The backlash started before we even made it back to the motel. My phone buzzed with a news alert as I helped Elena out of the car. Local family torn apart by abuse allegations. Daughter returns after 4 years to claim mother's fortune. The article, published by the Hillsborough Tribune less than 2 hours after our court hearing, painted a devastating picture. Anonymous sources described me as a, quote, estranged daughter with financial difficulties who had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman into false accusations. They quoted a neighbor, someone I'd never met, claiming Elena had seemed perfectly happy living with Marcus and Jessica until I arrived to stir up trouble. "Sarah," Elena said, reading over my shoulder, "they're making you sound like a monster." I scrolled through the comments section, my stomach turning with each new post. People who had never met any of us were making judgments about our family, our motives, our credibility. Marcus and Jessica's PR campaign was working exactly as intended. But then I noticed something interesting. Mixed in with the negative comments were others. People sharing their own stories of family members who had been financially exploited, elder abuse survivors who recognized the patterns I described. One comment stood out. "This sounds exactly like what happened to my grandmother. Same tactics, same gaslighting, don't give up." That's when I realized I had a choice. I could let Marcus control the narrative, or I could tell our story ourselves. I created a simple blog post on Medium that night, titled, "When Your Family Becomes Your Enemy, A Daughter's Fight for Justice." I didn't use real names or identifying details, but I told our story. The years of abuse, the systematic theft, the moment I realized my mother needed someone to fight for her. I included audio excerpts from Elena's recordings, with her permission, and photos of the legal documents showing the fraudulent transfers. Within hours, the post had hundreds of shares. By morning, it had thousands. The hashtag #AlderAbuseAwareness began trending on Twitter, with people sharing their own experiences and resources for families facing similar situations. But Marcus wasn't going to let me control the narrative without a fight. Saturday morning, Elena and I were having breakfast at a small cafe near the motel when my phone exploded with notifications. Someone had created a fake social media profile using my photo and professional information, posting inflammatory content about, quote, greedy children who abandon their families and return for inheritance money. The posts were sophisticated, well-written, designed to look like something I might actually write. "They're good at this," Elena observed, watching me scroll through the fabricated posts. "They've had practice." "Practice?" She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. When you were in high school, remember when Amy Morrison accused Marcus of cheating on her with her best friend? Suddenly, there were rumors about Amy being unstable, jealous, making things up for attention. The rumors seemed to come from everywhere at once. I did remember. Amy had been a quiet, smart girl who'd dated Marcus for most of junior year. When she suddenly transferred schools mid-semester, the official story was that her family had moved. But now, with adult perspective, I wondered what had really happened. My phone rang. Margaret Kim, her voice tense. "Sarah, we have a problem. Marcus has filed a counterpetition claiming you've kidnapped Elena and are holding her against her will. He's requested an emergency hearing for Monday morning." Can he do that? He can try. But more concerning, he's hired Richard Blackwood as his attorney. I knew that name. Blackwood was Oregon's most notorious defense attorney, the kind who specialized in making victims look like villains and turning public opinion into a weapon. He was expensive, ruthless, and very, very good at his job. Where would Marcus get the money for Blackwood? Margaret's pause told me everything. From your mother's accounts, most likely. He's using her own money to fight her in court. The irony was sickening, but it also told me how desperate Marcus was becoming. Hiring Blackwood meant he was prepared to spend everything to maintain control. Sunday evening, I was working on my laptop in the motel lobby. The Wi-Fi was better there, when a woman approached my table. She was middle-aged, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" I tensed, expecting another reporter or someone connected to Marcus's smear campaign. "Depends who's asking." She smiled. "I'm Dr. Rachel Morrison. I'm a geriatrician here in Hillsborough, and I've been following your story. I treated your mother about 6 months ago." My heart jumped. "What did you treat her for?" Dr. Morrison sat down across from me, her expression serious. "She came in with Marcus, complained of memory problems, confusion, difficulty managing daily tasks. But here's the thing. My examination showed no signs of cognitive decline. Her memory tests were normal, her reasoning skills intact. I recommended she continue living independently with minimal support." What did Marcus say about that? He insisted she needed more intensive supervision. Said she was having episodes at home that I wasn't seeing in the clinical setting. He pushed hard for me to diagnose her with early-stage dementia, but I couldn't in good conscience do that based on her presentation. I leaned forward. "Do you still have those records?" "That's why I'm here. When I saw the news coverage about your case, I reviewed her file again. I also found something troubling. After that appointment, someone called my office claiming to be Elena, requesting that her medical records be sent to Marcus for family medical planning, but the voice on the phone didn't match the woman I'd examined. It was younger, more educated. It sounded like Jessica." My pulse quickened. "Are you willing to testify about this?" "I've already spoken to your attorney. What they did, fabricating medical needs, potentially forging medical requests, it's not just elder abuse, it's healthcare fraud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the motel window, watching traffic move past on the highway, processing everything Dr. Morrison had told me. Marcus and Jessica hadn't just stolen Elena's money. They tried to steal her identity, her competence, her right to make decisions about her own life. Elena stirred in the bed behind me. "Sarah, what time is it?" "Almost midnight. Go back to sleep." She sat up instead, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "I keep thinking about something Dr. Morrison said, about someone impersonating me to get my medical records." "What about it?" "Jessica used to be a medical receptionist before she married Marcus. She knows how these systems work, what passwords and verification questions they typically use. And she's heard me on the phone with doctors before." I turned to face her. "You think she's done this before?" "I think they've been planning this for a long time. Ever since your father died and left me everything in his will instead of splitting it between Marcus and me, like Marcus expected. That was news to me. Dad left Marcus out of the will." Elena nodded sadly. "He tried to leave you something too, but we couldn't find you." Marcus was furious. Said it wasn't fair. that he'd been the one taking care of us while you were playing house in the city. I think that's when they started planning how to get control of everything. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Dad's death, the will that favored Elena, Marcus's sudden interest in becoming her caregiver, the systematic isolation and financial manipulation. This hadn't been opportunistic abuse. It had been a calculated plan to steal an inheritance he felt he deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the case or we'll destroy you. We have resources you can't imagine." I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Margaret. Then I typed back, "See you in court Monday." But even as I hit send, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Marcus and Jessica had spent months perfecting their system of control and manipulation. They had money, connections, and a lawyer who specialized in making the truth look like lies. All I had was Elena's courage and a collection of evidence that painted them as monsters. In the cold light of that motel room, with my mother's bruised face visible in the lamplight, I wondered if that would be enough. Monday's hearing would determine everything, whether Elena would regain control of her life and assets, or whether Marcus would succeed in painting me as the real villain in this story. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the enemy had never been more dangerous. But as I watched Elena sleep, her face peaceful for the first time since I'd found her in that parking lot, I knew I had something Marcus would never understand. The absolute certainty that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. The war for Elena's freedom was about to reach its climax, and I was ready for whatever they threw at us next. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity. No rain, no clouds, just crisp October air and sunlight that seemed to cut through everything like a blade. Elena and I sat in Margaret's office an hour before the hearing, reviewing our strategy one final time. Elena wore the same navy dress from Friday, but today she looked different. Stronger, like she'd spent the weekend remembering who she used to be before Marcus convinced her she was broken. "They're going to attack your credibility," Margaret warned Elena. "Blackwood's strategy will be to make you seem confused, unreliable, easily manipulated by Sarah. He'll try to twist your own words against you." "Let him try," Elena said quietly. "I'm done being afraid of the truth." The courthouse was more crowded than Friday. Word had spread about the case, particularly after my blog post went viral. I recognized faces from the community, some supportive, others clearly aligned with Marcus and Jessica. The local news had sent a crew, their camera equipment set up discreetly in the back row. Marcus looked different too. Gone was the polished, confident son from Friday's hearing. Today he seemed agitated, whispering urgently to Blackwood, his eyes darting around the room like he was looking for escape routes. Jessica sat behind him, no longer playing the grieving daughter-in-law. Her expression was cold, calculating, like she was preparing for war. Judge Wells called the session to order, and Blackwood immediately requested permission to present new evidence. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mrs. Elena Chen has been struggling with cognitive decline for over a year. We have medical consultations, incident reports, and testimony from caregivers who witnessed her deteriorating condition." He produced a thick folder of papers, spreading them across the defense table like playing cards. "Furthermore, we have evidence that Ms. Sarah Chen has been financially unstable, recently behind on rent payments, and facing potential bankruptcy. Her sudden interest in her mother's welfare appears to coincide suspiciously with her own financial difficulties." My stomach dropped. How had they gotten access to my financial records? But Margaret squeezed my arm reassuringly. She'd warned me this was coming. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Wells said, "I'll review your documentation, but I'd like to hear from the witnesses first." Margaret called Dr. Morrison to the stand. She testified clearly and professionally about Elena's normal cognitive test results and the suspicious phone call requesting medical records. Under cross-examination, Blackwood tried to suggest that Elena might have been showboating during the medical exam, but Dr. Morrison held firm. "In 30 years of geriatric medicine," she said, "I've learned to distinguish between actual cognitive decline and situational stress. Mrs. Chen showed no signs of dementia. What she showed were signs of someone living under extreme psychological pressure." Next, Mrs. Patterson took the stand, describing the arguments she'd overheard and Elena's visible deterioration after moving in with Marcus. Blackwood dismissed her as a neighborhood busybody with poor hearing, but her testimony was specific, detailed, and devastating. Then it was Elena's turn. She walked to the witness stand slowly but steadily, her head held high. Blackwood started his questioning with false sympathy, asking about her confusion and memory problems. But Elena had prepared for this. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I'm not confused about what happened to me. I'm not confused about my son hitting me, about being left in a parking lot in freezing rain, or about watching my life savings disappear into accounts I never authorized. But Mrs. Chen, you signed documents giving your son power of attorney. I signed documents after being told repeatedly that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. After months of being isolated from friends, from my own home, from anyone who might have questioned what was happening. That's not informed consent, Mr. Blackwood. That's coercion." Blackwood tried a different approach. "Isn't it true that you called your daughter Sarah vindictive and emotionally unstable when she left for college?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, I said those things. And isn't it true that you haven't spoken to her in 4 years?" "Yes." "So why should this court believe that she has your best interests at heart now?" Elena looked directly at me, then back at Blackwood. "Because she came when I needed her. Because she believed me when no one else would. Because she's fighting for my dignity, not my money. That's something Marcus never understood, the difference between those two things." The courtroom was silent. Even Blackwood seemed momentarily stunned by her simple, devastating honesty. But Marcus wasn't done fighting. When called to testify, he painted himself as the devoted son overwhelmed by a mother's declining health and a sister's vindictive return. He explained the financial transfers as necessary protection for Elena's assets during her episodes of poor judgment. "Your Honor," he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion, "I've sacrificed my own financial stability to care for my mother. My marriage has suffered, my business has suffered, all because I refused to put her in a nursing home when she became too difficult to manage at home." It was a compelling performance. For a moment, I wondered if the judge might actually believe him. Then Margaret stood for redirect examination. "Mr. Chen, you mentioned sacrificing your financial stability to care for your mother. Can you explain how purchasing a $70,000 Mercedes-Benz constitutes a sacrifice?" Marcus stumbled. That was a necessary expense. My mother needed reliable transportation for medical appointments." "A Mercedes-Benz for medical appointments? She deserved something comfortable." "Mr. Chen, your mother was found wearing a nightgown and slippers in a parking lot. How does owning a luxury vehicle she's never allowed to drive constitute care?" The cross-examination went downhill from there. Margaret had done her homework, tracking every dollar of Elena's stolen money. The car, the down payment on a vacation home in Bend, Jessica's new jewelry, Marcus's business investments, all funded with Elena's life savings while she was told she couldn't afford basic medical care. When Jessica took the stand, she tried to maintain the caring daughter-in-law act, but Margaret's questions were surgical. Why hadn't they reported Elena missing the night she was found? Why had they waited 17 minutes to start calling her phone? If they were truly concerned about her safety, why leave her alone in a parking lot instead of driving her to a hospital? "We thought she just needed time to cool down," Jessica said, her composure finally cracking. She'd been having these outbursts, making wild accusations. Sometimes a little space helps people gain perspective. Space? In freezing rain, wearing only a nightgown? We didn't know she wasn't properly dressed. You didn't look at her before you left her there? Jessica's silence was answer enough. The final bombshell came when Margaret presented evidence I hadn't expected. During the weekend recess, she'd subpoenaed Marcus's business records and discovered that his company had been failing for over a year. He owed money to creditors, faced potential bankruptcy, and had been using Elena's funds not just for luxury purchases, but to keep his business afloat. "Your Honor," Margaret said, "this wasn't caregiving. This was desperation. Mr. Chen saw his mother's assets as his financial salvation, and when she began questioning his control, he responded with intimidation and violence. Judge Wells reviewed the evidence for what felt like hours. Finally, she spoke. "I've rarely seen a case with such clear documentation of systematic elder abuse. The evidence shows a pattern of financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, and physical violence designed to maintain control over Mrs. Chen's assets and autonomy." She looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your actions represent a profound betrayal of trust. You've stolen your mother's financial security, undermined her mental health, and physically harmed her when she dared to question your authority." The ruling was comprehensive. Permanent guardianship granted to me, full restitution of stolen funds ordered, criminal referral for elder abuse and fraud charges, and a permanent restraining order preventing Marcus and Jessica from contacting Elena. But the most significant moment came when Judge Wells addressed Elena directly. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that your courage in speaking the truth has likely prevented this abuse from continuing indefinitely. You are not confused, you are not incompetent, and you deserve to live the rest of your life with dignity and safety." Elena wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. I feel like myself again for the first time in months." As we left the courthouse, reporters surrounded us, but this time the questions were different. Instead of accusations, they wanted to know about resources for other families facing similar situations. Elena, surprising everyone, including me, stopped to speak to them. "If someone you love starts acting differently after a family member begins helping with their finances," she said, looking directly into the news camera, "don't assume it's aging or illness. Ask questions, trust your instincts, and remember that real love doesn't require signing away your independence." Outside, Marcus waited by his car, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. As we walked past, he called out, "This isn't over, Sarah. You think you've won, but you don't know what you've started." I stopped and turned to face him. "You're right. I started something. I started the end of your control over people who can't fight back. And if there are others you've hurt the way you hurt Elena and me, I hope they're watching this and know they don't have to stay silent either." Behind him, Jessica stood with her arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller and more frightened than I'd ever seen her. Whatever spell Marcus had cast over the people in his life was finally breaking. As Elena and I drove away from the courthouse, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming back for me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me." The legal battle was over, but I knew the real work, rebuilding Elena's life and our relationship, was just beginning. Still, as I watched Marcus's figure disappear in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of truth finally winning over lies. Justice, it turned out, tasted like freedom. 3 months later, I stood in Elena's kitchen, her real kitchen, watching her make pancakes from scratch on a Saturday morning. The pale yellow walls had been repainted, the missing photo frames replaced, and the ceramic bird collection restored to its place of honor on the windowsill. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been professionally cleaned, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors we'd had refinished the month before. Elena moved around the kitchen with confidence I hadn't seen since I was a child. Her wrist had healed completely, leaving only a thin white scar as evidence of that terrible night. The bruises on her face were long gone, replaced by color that came from working in her garden and sleeping through the night without fear. "You're burning the pancakes," she said without turning around, that familiar note of gentle criticism in her voice that used to annoy me but now felt like coming home. "I'm supervising," I corrected, flipping them expertly. "There's a difference." It had taken weeks to establish this easy rhythm between us. I'd moved back to Hillsborough temporarily, renting a small apartment downtown, while Elena adjusted to living independently again. Some days were harder than others. She'd have moments of anxiety about being alone, phantom fears that Marcus might return despite the restraining order. I'd have moments of doubt about whether I was rebuilding my life around someone who might push me away again once she felt safe. But slowly, carefully, we were learning to trust each other. The criminal case against Marcus and Jessica had concluded the week before. Marcus pled guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and full restitution of Elena's stolen funds. Jessica pled guilty to identity theft and fraud, receiving 12 months in jail and 3 years probation. Standing in that courtroom, watching them in orange jumpsuits instead of expensive suits, I'd felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. These were people who'd had everything: family, security, love, and they'd thrown it all away for money that was never really theirs to begin with. "Do you think they'll try to contact you when they get out?" Elena had asked me after the sentencing. "I think they'll be too busy trying to rebuild their own lives," I'd replied. "And if they do, we'll be ready." The blog post I'd written about our experience had grown into something larger than I'd ever imagined. Thousands of people had shared their own stories of family abuse, financial exploitation, and the courage it took to speak truth to power. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, write articles for legal journals, and consult with families facing similar situations. "You're becoming famous," Elena had teased when a newspaper in Seattle wanted to interview me about elder abuse prevention. "I'm becoming useful," I'd corrected. "There's a difference." Now, as we sat down to breakfast in her kitchen, Elena pulled out a letter that had arrived in yesterday's mail. The return address was from Portland Community College. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," she said, unfolding the pages. "About taking that art class. One always wanted to try." I looked at the enrollment forms she'd partially filled out. Ceramics and pottery making. That sounds perfect. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "I haven't been around new people in so long. What if I'm not good at it? What if I can't keep up?" "Then you'll be like every other beginning student," I said. "The point isn't to be perfect. The point is to do something that makes you happy." She smiled. That real smile I was still getting used to seeing. "When did you become so wise?" "When I realized wisdom isn't about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions." After breakfast, we drove to Elena's house. I still caught myself thinking of it as her house rather than home, though that was changing too. We were meeting with a contractor about installing a security system, not because we expected trouble, but because Elena wanted to feel completely safe in her own space. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mrs. Patterson working in her garden next door. She waved enthusiastically, then walked over to greet us. "Elena, you look wonderful," she said, embracing my mother warmly. "How are you settling back in?" "Better every day," Elena replied. "Having Sarah close by makes all the difference." Mrs. Patterson turned to me. "I read your article online, dear. So many people have shared their own stories because of what you wrote. You've given them permission to speak up." That evening, Elena and I sat on her front porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. She'd always loved this time of day, when the light turned golden and the air smelled like grass and possibility. We'd installed a porch swing earlier that week, something she'd wanted for years, but Marcus had always said was unnecessary. "Sarah," she said, breaking our comfortable silence, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." I looked at her, noting how the fading light softened the lines around her eyes. "You don't owe me any apologies, Elena. We've been through that. This isn't an apology. It's an acknowledgement." She turned to face me fully. "When you were growing up, I failed you. I protected Marcus instead of protecting you. Made excuses for his behavior instead of stopping it. I told myself I was keeping the family together, but really I was just avoiding the hard work of actually parenting." I started to respond, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. When you left for college, I was angry because your leaving forced me to see what I'd been hiding from. That I'd raised a son who hurt people and a daughter who felt safer away from home. That's not your fault, Sarah. That's mine." "We both made mistakes," I said softly. "Yes, but mine had consequences for a child who deserved better. Yours were just the natural response of someone trying to survive." She paused, watching a neighbor walk their dog down the street. "I can't undo those years, but I can promise you something going forward. If you decide to stay in Hillsborough, if you want to try building something new between us, I'll never ask you to be anyone other than who you are." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I think I'd like that. Even if I'm not very good at it at first?" "Even then." We sat in silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Down the street, I could see families settling in for the evening. Parents helping children with homework, couples cooking dinner together, teenagers texting friends about weekend plans. Ordinary life, the kind I'd convinced myself wasn't meant for people like us. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Restitution check cleared. Elena's accounts are fully restored. I showed Elena the message. She nodded, but I could tell the money wasn't what mattered to her anymore. What mattered was the knowledge that she could make her own decisions about it. "What will you do with it?" I asked. "Some of it will go to legal fees, some to fixing up the house properly." She paused thoughtfully. "I'd like to donate some to organizations that help other families going through what we went through. And maybe I'll help you start that consulting firm you always talked about, the one that helps people navigate family crises." I stared at her. "You remember me talking about that?" "I remember everything you ever told me about your dreams, Sarah. I just never knew how to encourage them properly." As we prepared to go inside, Elena stopped at the front door and turned back to look at the street. "This feels different now," she said. "Like it's really mine again." "Because it is." "No," she said, fishing her keys from her purse. "New keys, since we'd changed all the locks. Because now I know the difference between having something and being trapped by it. Because now I know that home isn't just a place where people can't hurt you. It's a place where they choose not to." Inside, we settled into our evening routine. Elena made tea while I sorted through the mail, separating bills from catalogs from the letters that still arrived daily from people who'd read our story. Many were from adult children struggling with similar situations, some from elderly parents who recognized themselves in Elena's experience, others from professionals working in elder care who wanted resources and guidance. "We should answer some of these," Elena said, reading over my shoulder. "People need to know they're not alone." "We could start a website," I suggested. "Share resources, legal information, maybe set up a way for people to connect with each other." Elena smiled. "Look at us, planning to change the world from my kitchen table." Stranger things have happened. As I prepared to leave for my apartment, Elena walked me to the door. This had become our nightly ritual, a way of acknowledging that while we were rebuilding our relationship, we were both learning to be independent people at the same time. "Sarah," she said as I reached for my car keys, "do you think Marcus will ever understand what he did wrong?" I considered the question seriously. In the months since the trial, Marcus had sent several letters to Elena through his attorney. Not apologies, but justifications. Explanations of how he'd been trying to protect her, how we'd misunderstood his intentions, how the family might reconcile if only we could see past our anger. "I think Marcus understands that what he did had consequences," I said finally. "But understanding consequences and understanding harm are different things. He may never be capable of the second one." Elena nodded sadly. "I still love him. Even after everything, he's still my son. But I finally understand that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you." That might be the most important thing either of us learns from this. Driving through Hillsborough's quiet streets toward my apartment, I reflected on how much had changed since that phone call 3 months ago. Elena had her life back, her house, her money, her dignity, her voice. The town that had once felt like a prison now felt like a community where we both belonged. And me? I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. The knowledge that family isn't just about blood or history or the people who raised you. Sometimes family is about the people who show up when everything falls apart and help you build something better from the pieces. My phone buzzed with a final text of the evening from Elena. "Sweet dreams, daughter. Thank you for coming home." I saved the message and smiled, understanding for the first time that coming home isn't always about returning to where you came from. Sometimes it's about creating a place where love doesn't require silence, where truth doesn't need to be hidden, and where the people who matter most choose to stay. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. My consulting business was growing, Elena was starting her art classes, and we were both learning how to navigate a relationship built on honesty instead of habit. But tonight, driving through streets that finally felt familiar instead of foreign, I knew we were exactly where we needed to be. The silence was finally, completely shattered, and in its place was something much more powerful. The sound of two women who'd found their voices, and weren't afraid to use them. Sometimes the best endings aren't about perfect resolution. They're about the courage to begin again.